across to Vancouver. Speak to our correspondent Craig McCulloch, who joins us from there. So, Craig, despite Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden now taking a harder line, there's little sign, really, of these protests slowing down, is there?
Stuart, their determination is growing by the minute or by the second. We do have some late-breaking developments on the Ambassador Bridge, which is the busiest border crossing in all of Canada. And the City of Windsor and a couple of auto manufacturer associations are going to Ontario's Superior Court to hope to get an injunction to end the blockade tomorrow. It's causing havoc on the auto industry because a number of auto plants, mostly in the Canadian side, have had to either shut down some product lines or end shifts and temporarily lay off some workers. And that's multiple auto manufacturers. And there's also, as you mentioned, there's also two other borders that are closed between Coutts, Alberta, and Sweetgrass, Montana. And the one that just got closed down today by semi-trucks, farm tractors, and in true Canadian fashion, snowplows, is between Emerson, Manitoba, and Pembina, North Dakota. Now, they're kind of rural areas. But on the second busiest border crossing, which is actually out here in the Vancouver area, there is also a protest. They're on the sidewalk just yelling and screaming and having a good old time. But that's where it currently stands right now in terms of the borders.
And let's look ahead to the weekend, Craig, because I know that things are likely to kick off, if that's the right word, once again this weekend as other people join in.
There is. In the past 2 weekends, there have been protests across Canada. All the protests you see in New Zealand and over there in France, actually all started right here in Vancouver, where a bunch of truckers started the convoy or caravan across Canada. What we have seen the past couple of weekends and what is anticipated to be happening this weekend is kind of mini convoys starting off in cities across Canada from the suburbs and going into the downtown part of each city. And we've seen that for the past 2 weekends. A lot of them are kind of some of them are sticking to the original protest, which is to eliminate the vaccine mandates and allow unvaccinated truckers across the border. But this is also spread. There's a lot of people that are opposed to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. To be honest, a lot of them are opposed to anything Trudeau because we have to not forget that Justin's dad, Pierre, was Prime Minister a few years ago. You have a lot of conspiracy theorists around them, and unfortunately, you do have some occasional neo-Nazis and swastikas. Ironically, there has also been a late-breaking news out of Ontario that the fundraising platform for the protesters, they did raise about $10 million US in GoFundMe. That was stopped, and then they went over to a platform called Give, Send, Go, and they've raised $8.2 million US so far. But the Ontario Supreme Court, or Superior Court, which has been busy with injunctions today by the sounds of it, says that Give, Send, Go cannot send money to the Canadian protesters, and those Canadian protesters cannot use that money. Give, Send, Go has reacted by saying, well, the Canadian government can't tell us what to do with our money. But the fact of the matter is, it's not the Canadian government, it's a Canadian court. And yes, they can actually rule and decide on what the money is used for in here in Canada. So the Give, Send, Go might be Give, Send, Stop by the end of the day.
Craig, thanks very much. Craig McCulloch, our correspondent, talking to us there from Vancouver.
On the American side of the busiest land crossing between the U.S. and Canada, not a wheel is turning. Traffic on the Ambassador Bridge had been stopped in both directions. Now, on the other side, from Canada to the U.S., just a trickle of trucks is allowed through. On Monday, hundreds of angry truckers disrupted North America's most bustling international commercial connector. And they say they'll keep it up until vaccine mandates and other COVID-19 restrictions are abolished on both sides of the border. In a heated exchange in Canada's Parliament, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau insists Canada won't be bullied.
You can't end a pandemic with blockades. You can't end a pandemic by decreeing it. You can't even end it by legislation. You need to end it with science. You need to end it with public health measures. And even as Canadians are tired and impatient for it to end, we are going to continue to be there for them, to support them through it, and to make sure we do everything necessary to end this pandemic.
The protesting truckers say they'll continue their blockade as long as it takes. So far, police have been reticent to clear the roads.
You know, it's just domino effect. A whole bunch of stuff added up, and that's what it turned out to be, is guys hate to say it, but pissed off.
Each day, hundreds of millions of dollars in commerce crosses the Ambassador Bridge, including 25% of Canada's total global exports. So with billions at stake, each hour and each day, the chance of a confrontation between police and protesting truckers increases. In the U.S. and in Canada, patience is wearing thin.
There will have to be a resolve one way or the other. And I'm not saying that to suggest that, we're going to go in with battering rams and 1,000 police officers. That may not be the solution, but there has to be a resolution to get this border crossing open so that we do not impact the economies of the United States and Canada.
As the standoff wears on, it remains to be seen whether the first to lose patience will be the protesting truckers or police. Along the U.S.-Canadian border, the truckers' blockade is slowly taking its toll. This paddle border is moving faster than traffic. And as rebels in 18-wheelers demanding an end to COVID-19 restrictions continue using their freedom convoy to block the border on the Canadian side, the pain is being felt on both sides. Ford has stopped its auto assembly line in Windsor, Toyota has closed 3 plants across Ontario, and General Motors is cutting shifts in Michigan. And those closures threaten to reverberate throughout the auto supply chain. Despite the added time in traffic, this trucker says the demonstrators have a point.
Everybody has the right to do whatever you want, If I want to die, I want to die. I don't care.
Okay, I support them, but I think it kind of sucks, all the traffic here,
On Thursday, the truckers opened another front, blocking all lanes on Manitoba's main crossing to North Dakota. And with the Ambassador Bridge blocked from Detroit to Windsor, traffic on the busiest land crossing in North America is shut down entirely from the U.S. to Canada and all but closed in the other direction. Trucks carrying everything from cattle to car parts, which under automakers' just-in-time delivery system need to be delivered within 48 hours to keep assembly lines rolling, have been diverted to the crossing between Port Huron, Michigan, and the Canadian city of Sarnia. At the Blue Water Bridge, these trucks are getting across to Canada, but wait times have been up to 3 hours and traffic crawls. And that's likely to continue as long as the truckers' blockade goes on and politicians seem unwilling to crack down. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau insists Canada will follow the science.
Not only are Canadians tired of this pandemic, of the challenges we're facing, but they are also, of course, tired of the restrictions, tired of the rules, tired of the lockdowns. That is understandable. But you know what helps lift restrictions? You know what helps move beyond lockdowns? Vaccinations.
But some Canadian provinces, including Alberta and Saskatchewan, have eased COVID rules, and Quebec and Prince Edward Island announced plans to do the same. But with plans for a freedom convoy in the U.S., the truckers' protests show no sign of ending.
An Ontario Superior Court judge ordered protesters to stop blocking a vital bridge between Canada and the United States on Friday. Truck drivers and others clogging the Ambassador Bridge over the past 5 days have disrupted industrial supply chains on both sides of the border, forcing some auto factories to close. The bridge carries 1/4 of all trade between the countries. Earlier, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gave a warning to the occupiers who have been severely disrupting everyday life in the Canadian capital, Ottawa, for 2 weeks.
It is time for these protesters to go home. It is time to recognize that this protest, this blockade, is illegal. Everything is on the table because this unlawful activity has to end.
Trudeau spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden about the demonstrations and their conservative American supporters.
We discussed the American and indeed global influences on the protest. We talked about the U.S.-based flooding of the 911 phone lines in Ottawa, the presence of U.S. citizens in the blockades, and the impact of foreign money to fund this illegal activity.
The occupiers, who call themselves the Freedom Convoy, have been lavishly praised and encouraged by personalities on the right-leaning Fox News channel. Police officers moved among the trucks and other vehicles snarling city streets, collecting license plate information. Demonstrators heckled and jeered at them. The protests started among truck drivers, angered by a requirement they be vaccinated against COVID-19 when crossing back and forth over the U.S. border. But it has metastasized into a general anti-government movement.
How to end the convoy? You got to end the mandates. You got to end the mandates, and personally, I want Trudeau and whoever's pulling Trudeau's strings pulled, gone, out of Canada. I don't care what happens to them, but they got to be banished.
U.S. authorities are on guard against similar protests in Los Angeles, aimed at disrupting this weekend's Super Bowl.
The Department of Homeland Security is surging additional staff to its incident command post. There's strong cooperation with the California Highway Patrol, the Los Angeles Police Department.
The anti-vaccine protesters are certainly a minority in Canada. 88% of its citizens have received at least one dose of the vaccine.
Have these latest measures had any kind of effect or impact that authorities in Canada have desired?
Absolutely not. Just a few minutes ago, there was reports out of the Windsor, which is on the Canadian side of the border with Detroit, that the crowds on the bridge are actually growing in number, not decreasing in number. And throughout this weekend, we are expecting a lot more protests across Canada. This convoy, these protests across Canada actually started here in Vancouver when the convoy was started a few weeks ago, and then went across Canada to Ottawa. And that bridge there between, as I said, Windsor and Detroit is actually one of 3 border crossings that are blocked. There's one in Emerson, Manitoba, which is right across the border from Pembina, North Dakota, and also one near Coutts, Alberta, which is right on the border with Sweetgrass, Montana, for those of you keeping up in your North American geography. Now, those borders are very busy with agricultural trade, but that one border on the Detroit-Windsor Bridge sees hundreds of millions of dollars, usually in auto parts and other commercial goods, crossing it every day. So right now it's having the opposite effect, and one can reason with more people having the weekend off here in Canada, the numbers are probably going to increase before they go down.
Now, Craig, from what we can tell, there are some pretty stiff punishments on the cards for those that break these new rules. Tell us more.
Oh, yes, most definitely. If they are breaking the state of emergency, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has said that they face upwards of a $100,000 fine, which I put over to American money, which is $800,000 USD, or 80,000 USD, excuse me, or 69,000 euros. They can also get 1 year in jail, but believe it or not, that might not be the worst of it, because they may also have their personal or commercial licenses suspended, which means if you're a truck driver, you may not be able to go back to being a truck driver. Now, if you're in violation of the court order, that's kind of a little bit different here in Canada. That means you're in contempt of court, and that could mean a criminal fine. And that might mean you also cannot leave the country, which means not only could you not go into the United States for the rest of your life, you can't go and explore the Louvre or the Eiffel Tower, you can't go to Australia to pet a kangaroo. You basically will never be able to leave Canada for the rest of your life. In addition to that, Windsor police have said that vehicles and other personal or business property may be seized, and it may be seized as a part of a proceeds of crime, and protesters may never get their vehicles back ever again.
Heading north, starting on a roundabout in Toulouse, these protesters will drive hundreds of kilometres in a plan to converge on Paris and Brussels in protest to COVID-19 restrictions. It's an attempt to emulate Canada's Freedom Convoy. In Perpignan, protesters hope the movement takes off in France.
Je suis très heureux de venir participer ici à cette réunion et surtout d'encourager tous ceux qui vont partir pour ce convoi de la liberté, pour ceux qui ont le courage de faire ce qu'ont fait déjà les Canadiens devant nous. Freedom, freedom, freedom.
It's the first of the so-called Freedom Convoy in France that has seen protests begin in Toulouse as well as Perpignan and Nice.
Bah là, on a vite fait aménager, on a pris son matelas là, il rentrait pile poil dans la voiture et bon voilà, un peu de vivres, un peu d'eau. Et...
Among the protesters, medical personnel suspended because of their refusal to get vaccinated. There's also former members of the Yellow Vests, the movement that paralyzed France 3 years ago.
On a manifesté pratiquement tous les samedis, tout ça, mais apparemment les manifs ça bouge pas. Donc voilà, il y a eu cette initiative de faire un convoi comme au Canada. On va essayer de le faire. Si ça peut porter ses fruits, allons-y.
But they may not be as successful as their Canadian inspirations. Police have banned the demonstrations in the capital from Friday to Monday. Paris is still a few hundred kilometers away for these demonstrators. But despite a ban from the Paris police, they're determined to make it to the capital Friday to protest France's COVID-19 health pass.
Déterminé, on ira jusqu'au bout. On ne lâchera pas l'affaire. Là, il faut que ça change. Pour retrouver toutes nos libertés.
The Paris police announced measures Thursday should they obstruct traffic, with demonstrators potentially facing 2 years of imprisonment, a €4,500 fine, and suspension of their driver's license for up to 3 years.
Ils ont peur. Mais ils ont peur de quoi? Ils ont peur d'un camion là avec un drapeau.
But Paris is not the final destination for some of them.
Le but n'est pas de bloquer ni de rentrer dans Paris, c'est juste une étape sur le trajet de Bruxelles.
Pour nous, l'important, c'est Bruxelles, parce qu'on n'est pas les seuls, il n'y a pas que la France qui bouge, c'est l'Europe entière qui bouge.
Belgian authorities have also announced a ban on the convoy, due to arrive Monday because no request to demonstrate was filed. Until then, on the roads of Brittany or Avignon, demonstrators rely on each other's support.
Les gens ont besoin de cette énergie, de ce mouvement, et ont envie en fait que ce convoi arrive.
As Canada's Freedom Convoy, inspiring the French movement, continues causing major disruption, Friday will tell if the movement will have the same effect in France.
With thousands of cars not yet in the capital or blocked from entering, these Parisian protesters came out to cheer, dance, and support the so-called Freedom Convoy.
All these people from every French region have been blocked outside Paris, so we gathered despite that.
A copycat movement of the Canadian blockade, the protesters' demands are varied, from wanting the French government to ease COVID restrictions, to concerns over rising energy prices, to frustration with the government.
Of course, I support the convoy, but for me, it's visceral. I'm simply anti-Macron.
Every country is easing restrictions, so France will have to ease them at some point. The worst is for children.
According to police estimates, the convoys are made up of some 3,000 cars coming from across France. In Troyes, the cars were gearing up for a final push to the capital. Some even plan to go as far as Brussels for a European convergence on Monday. Many are old hands at such gatherings. They're part of the Yellow Vest movement.
Moi, je suis seule avec 2 enfants et pour moi, c'est la course tous les jours. Faut tirer de tous les côtés pour manger, pour ne serait-ce que d'aller au travail, le coût de l'essence.
Out of fear of public disturbances, the protests have been banned this weekend, a move backed up by the courts. The head of the Paris police thanked the some 7,000 officers that have been deployed overnight and through to Monday.
See, I'm here in central Paris at the Arc de Triomphe, la Place de l'Étoile, which is just at the top of the Champs-Élysées Avenue, and things have been getting very tense indeed here. We're just going to show you the scene. So there's numerous police vehicles, and you can see there those caravans, those vehicles which are part of this so-called Freedom Convoy, protesters who've, despite the ban, driven into Paris, and they're blocking this roundabout behind me, and the police have been trying to clear them out. They're using tear gas. They've been asking people to clear the scene, and there have been scuffles between protesters and police. Some protesters saying that they've been hit with police batons, some saying that, others posting photos online saying that they've had their windshields broken by police who were trying to get them out. And we know there are also vehicles further down the Champs-Élysées Avenue, just a few hundred meters away, who are trying to clear out vehicles who've been parked there, because these protesters wanted, of course, to come in and block the roads and demonstrate, and the police have banned them from doing so, and now they're trying to close it down here in central Paris, but the situation is kind of still a standoff, really.
And Catherine, the police said beforehand that any such blockade would not be tolerated. What sort of precautions were they taking?
Well, the police had 7,200 officers, police and gendarmes under the French system, stationed around Paris and at all the major road leading into the French capital. So they've banned anyone on this convoy from coming into Paris from Friday through to Monday, and they have they have stopped people there and issued fines, 337 fines already issued as of 2:30 p.m. here in France, and they said that they stopped a convoy of some 450 vehicles coming in to the south of Paris a little earlier on today. So they have got a lot of officers deployed, and they are keeping an eye on various locations throughout Paris.
Good afternoon.
The U.S. National Security Advisor took to the White House podium Friday with an urgent-sounding warning.
Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event in the next 24 to 48 hours. We obviously cannot predict the future. We don't know exactly what is going to happen, but the risk is now high enough, and the threat is now immediate enough, that this is what prudence demands.
He warned that these Russian military exercises could quickly turn into an attack on Ukraine, possibly with bombings and missile strikes, and eventually a ground invasion. Russia has repeatedly denied it's intending to attack its neighbor, but with the current buildup of forces and equipment along the Russia-Ukraine border, the U.S. believes it could. And in another sign of urgency, a virtual meeting Friday morning between the U.S. president and his European allies, NATO, Canada, Poland, and Romania. Soon after, the Pentagon announced an additional 3,000 troops will be headed to Poland in the coming days, on top of the nearly 2,000 that are already on the way, in addition to the 1,000 soldiers deployed to Romania. U.S. President Joe Biden says while troops will go to NATO countries, he's ruled out sending any into Ukraine if there is an invasion. Still, the U.S. insists there is still time to come to a diplomatic solution.
The administration has taken its concerns about Russia very publicly, very earnestly, very forthrightly, and there's a potential reward here if Putin eventually takes an off-ramp and begins to de-escalate.
The White House has confirmed that President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin will speak on the phone Saturday, a call that may provide a clearer picture of the likely path forward. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Joint Russian and Belarusian military exercises near the Ukrainian border. Up to 30,000 Russian soldiers and most of the Belarusian army are taking part in the 10 days of drills, including missile defense systems, tanks and fighter jets. Moscow has around 100,000 troops stationed close to Ukraine's borders. Ukraine invoked a clause from the so-called 2011 Vienna document, which is an international agreement on military transparency and which Russia is a signatory of, demanding Moscow provide detailed information and timeframes for military maneuvers. Several Western countries, including France, launched fresh diplomatic efforts this week to persuade Russia to back down. So far, those efforts have failed to bear significant fruit. Moscow says its demand that there never be further NATO expansion east, including Ukraine, is being ignored. Ukraine's foreign minister told Al Jazeera Russia's concerns are illegitimate and Ukraine would not concede to Moscow's demands.
Russia violated virtually every rule of international law related to security in the last years. So now it wants to impose on others the discussion that you guys are expanding NATO or doing something else, and that inflicts damage on my security. The last thing the West should do in response to that question is actually to agree to take this concern seriously. Instead, it's us, Ukraine and other countries who suffered from Russia's actions, should ask them a question. How will you, Russia, ensure your security without inflicting damage on our security?
New satellite images published by a private US company show what it says is new Russian military deployment near Ukraine's border. More NATO troops and weapons are being sent to bolster the alliance's eastern flank. In a rare press conference in the Russian-backed separatist-held territory, the leader of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic accused Ukraine of planning a military solution to the crisis, something Ukraine denies.
I do not rule out that Ukraine can attack at any time. They have everything ready. The concentration of forces and capabilities allows them to do it at any moment, as soon as there is a political decision.
Russia says it has no intention of invading Ukraine, but it says it will be forced to take unspecified military technical action if its demands are not met. Moscow's main demand is that Ukraine never becomes a NATO member, and that's something that the US and its NATO allies say is a non-starter. Diplomatic efforts to defuse the crisis continue to fail. Charles Strafford, Al Jazeera, Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine.
Patrolling the Sea of Azov, the Ukrainian Navy says it's constantly on alert. According to the Marine Guards, Russian boats are frequently drawing closer to the Ukrainian coastline.
Since 2014, we've been waiting, preparing every day for an attack by Russia. We're not surprised by such actions by the Russian Federation. Everyone knows we're all waiting, preparing. There is no panic.
The Sea of Azov is rich in marine life and gas deposits and handles significant freight and passenger traffic. Both Russia and Ukraine control parts of the sea, but since the annexation of Crimea, the Kremlin has imposed a range of maritime restrictions on vessels using Ukrainian ports. Kiev has long condemned Russian efforts to disrupt shipping in the zone, notably to Mariupol. The port city is not only vulnerable to the sea, but also to surrounding land controlled by Russian-backed separatists. It's not only at sea that Moscow is bolstering its military presence, with equipment and troops stationed along land borders in Belarus and Russia. However, amid escalating tensions in the region, analysts say a naval blockade could be an attractive option if Russia wanted to harm its former Soviet neighbor. The move would have devastating consequences for Ukraine's economy without the risk of Russian military losses.
This is the second time in 7 months Delaware Farms has been forced to cull its chickens. 30,000 birds are being destroyed just 2 weeks after $63,000 was spent to restock the farm.
So it's very, very devastating for us and very difficult to bear. So we just have to come and depopulate them and all that. So we've really lost so much. So we don't even know what to do now.
Last year, bird flu was the H9N2 virus. This year, it's the more lethal H5N1 variant, which is difficult to control.
24 hours ago, 4,000 chickens were here. Now it's nearly empty. And even the few remaining will have to be destroyed. Veterinary officials say just one infection is enough reason to cull the entire farm birds.
And the rising number of deaths across Ghana worries the government.
We are having to deal with it to try to minimize the costs in terms of the deaths, mortalities. This is the highest in the 10-year period, the third one. We have more than 700,000 birds which have either been put down as a preventive measure to control the spread or had died out of the infection.
The military, rescue workers and locals spent hours picking through mud and debris, searching for signs of life. In this poor neighborhood in Colombia's Dos Quebradas region, heavy rain continued through the night, loosening the soil on the mountain. By morning, a large chunk had broke free, burying the homes below.
It was a very loud bang at 6:30 in the morning, and it swept away all the houses in front of it, about 6 houses, including the people inside.
It felt like the whole world was coming down. My brother was shouting, get out of the river, it's overflowing. And when we got out, the tragedy had already happened. People were shouting. My brother pulled a lady out who had already died. My father pulled out an elderly lady who was our lifelong neighbour.
Families from dozens of homes have been moved away from danger zones. Local authorities say the nearby Otun River is overflowing and the soil on the mountain remains unstable. They also fear any more mudslides could block the river and cause major flooding.
First, we're working on the rescue. Secondly, we are mitigating the risk factor in the upper part of the landslide, which are the water flows and the factors that generated the disaster, the emergency.
The death toll is expected to rise as many have been taken to hospital with critical injuries. The problem of mudslides is common here during the rainy season and has led to major catastrophes in the past, the biggest in 2017, when 320 people were killed in the southern Putumayo province. Those most vulnerable often live in poorly constructed wooden homes built on mountains in valleys and along rivers. In Dos Quebradas, it's those impoverished communities who are left not only displaced, but dealing with the deaths of family members.